Hey guys, subscribe for daily knife content, and if you're shopping for knives and gear, make sure you check out the description of the video you're watching right now for links to some great online retailers. There's also individual links for knives that I personally recommend. Thanks!
What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and welcome to episode 6 of my current series, The Very Best EDC Folding Knife. As you can see here, we've gone through episodes 1 through 5. You can actually go back into the Very Best EDC Folding Knife playlist and check out each individual episode, watch it, see how we came to each of these conclusions. So what is this? If you're somebody who hasn't seen this series, essentially this is a 6-part series where I talk about all of the different elements that I look for in an ideal EDC folding knife for me. Over the last 10 years, I've handled tons and tons and tons of knives, especially over the last 3 with the channel, literally hundreds and hundreds. And despite having lots of enthusiast preferences for stuff like this full titanium 8020, for whatever reason I keep reaching, when it comes to actual EDC, I keep reaching for stuff like the Para 3. So I thought it might be fun to explore exactly what it is that I consider ideal for my carry situations. Now, everybody's carry preferences are going to be different, so the idea here with the series is not to state factually what the best element is for everybody, just more so when it comes to my own preferences. You can pick and choose the parts of this series that make sense to you, and then you can ignore everything else. As you can see today, we are at blade shape, so that's what we're going to be discussing. A lot of this stuff will be linked right down below, so you can check it out if you want. By the way, I'm obviously still fighting a cough. I am doing my best to keep that from surfacing during this episode, but there's a good chance I'm going to be coughing all the way through it. It's just a nagging cough. I've recovered from everything else, by the way. The nagging cough is the only thing left, so I'm sorry about that. Thanks so much to my generous patrons for supporting me right now. You can check out my Patreon right down in the description. And please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. Excuse me. All right. So, blade shape. Here's the thing, guys. Something that I say at the beginning of each of these episodes. When I dismiss a blade shape, or I dismiss an element, it does not mean that it's bad, and then when I narrow it down, whatever I choose is good. No, it just means it's not going to be ideal for me, and then I'll kind of explain myself, right? So, you know, if you've been EDCing, excuse me, a certain type of blade shape, and it's been working for you, then you should continue to do that. In fact, if your preferences throughout this entire series have been, you know, totally different than mine, and they've been working for you, you don't need to change anything. You should just continue doing exactly what you're doing, right? Some people are going to find benefit in parts of this. That's the whole idea. And to, I don't know, kind of narrow down what it is about certain knives that make me more likely to carry them. Let me get something out of the way right off the bat, because I know somebody's going to say, the Opinel's blade shape is the best blade shape for EDC. No, it isn't. Pass. Not for me, anyway. It's too thin. It's a clip point blade. I need a little bit more durability out here. I can literally bend this. I'm not somebody who's going around, you know, chopping down trees with my knife or, you know, prying open bomb shelter doors with it. But I do need a little more durability, just on the off chance that I might need to do something a little bit not knife tasky, right, with my knife. Once I did have to pry with this guy, and I'm glad I had it because I didn't have any other tools with me. I used it and I thought, well, if it breaks, then it breaks. If it doesn't break, you know, great, we can go on. And I did, and it worked. This geometry is not necessarily a robust geometry in the anterior wrap. I'm going to leave this guy out here, by the way. But I think it's more capable. It's not as slicey as the Opinel, but that's fine. I'll take that trade-off. I want a little bit more durability in my EDC knives, right? Not meant for durability. I don't need that much, right? Some people, maybe you need that much. I don't need. My life isn't that cool. My life isn't that extreme. But I do want a little bit more robustness in my blades, right? Let's talk about some other blade shapes that might be a little bit overkill. So, as an enthusiast, the Harpoon, like, if we're going to talk about hinder knives, you don't know I'm a huge hinder nut, right? This is a thick blade, 165 thousandths, right? Massive flat that goes through the center here. Carries a crazy amount of thickness out to the tip. Has this awesome Harpoon notch, right? Very thick behind the edge. As an enthusiast and as a Hinderer fan, I love this blade shape. I absolutely love it. I carry this guy. This is one of my hinderers right now. I love this knife. This blade shape is absolutely overkill. It is so robust, I don't think there's anything I could do with it that I would normally do with it on a day-to-day basis. I'm sure there's somebody that, I could break that. Give it to me and I'll break it at my super, crazy day-to-day lifestyle. Okay, calm down. This is not something that I'm going to break day-to-day. It's still cool. I like to carry it. It's just overkill, right? Very cool. Same kind of thing with the Demko, right? These massive flats through the center, and then the blade stock thickness. Right? I don't know that I really need the blade stock to be thicker than 125 thousandths, right? This guy is like 180, 185 thousandths, and that's cool. I mean, there are people out there who are going to make use of a more robust blade. I think I've said this many times. People fetishize the sliciness, right? And even though I'm sure you can tell, like we are sort of funneling towards that point. But there are people out there who make use of a more robust blade, right? People like to automatically assume that the thinner it is on the spine and the thinner it is behind the edge, the better it is as a knife all the way around. Maybe for, I mean, I think it's safe to say the majority of people benefit from that, right? But if your occupation demands excess durability from your knife, then you may not care about an ultra-thin slicing geometry, right? So that doesn't necessarily make it, it's not a quality of a knife that is universally better. I think it's really important to stress that to new people. Don't get caught up in the whole thinner is better universally thing. It's not always true. And I mean, knives are just part of a gigantic multi-directional teeter-totter that applies to any individual person slightly differently. There is no best. There is no, universally best element when it comes to a knife. There's preferences and, circumstances. That's all it is, right? Even though that's why I have to stress that this whole series is about my own preferences, right? It's called the very best EDC folding knife, but it means the very best EDC folding knife for me, in accordance with my own preferences and usage habits, right? Circumstances, things like that. So, too robust. Another blade that's just not going to work. A dagger blade, right? Why? It's got two edges. You get double the edge retention. Great, but you're limited. I mean, in terms of by the way, I love this. This is I want to call everything the Necronaut from this. This is the Arcane designed antimatter. And this was actually a gift from the gentleman who owns Arcane Design. So I really appreciate that. This is really cool. But the dagger blade is just not going to work. I mean, there is a benefit to being able to use one edge until, it's worn down and then just switch to the other edge. Sometimes I want to be able to put my thumb up on the spine of the blade or the non-sharpened spine. And you can't do that with a dagger blade, right? You just can't. So that's a trade-off that does not benefit me so much. It might benefit other people, but a dagger blade just isn't going to work for me. Another blade that is not going to work for me is a Tanto and any variant of Tanto. Here's the thing. Tantos are incredible. I'm just going to say that because I know a lot of people are like, what? Tanto? Tanto? I love Tanto. Okay. I love Tanto too. I'm so stupid. I'm sorry. I'm sure you can guess that I had to take cough medicine. Anyways, Tantos are great. They're very robust. Usually, I mean, not all Tantos are ground the same way. This is the Hellhound from the Microtech Combat Troid Online. They're usually very thick behind the edge. They're usually a straight edge. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's more of a Japanese-style Tanto, right? Where it's got some curvature. The main reason I don't want it for EDC is not because of anything else. I mean, there are Tantos that are thinner behind the edge. There are Tantos that are curved and have belly, right? It's because of the two separate edges. That is beneficial. Sometimes, like this one has belly on the second edge, which is weird. Okay. Sometimes that edge is good for scraping, right? You can use that edge for getting into a packet, whatever, right? Sometimes having two different edges is good for different things. When it comes to sharpening, I don't want to mess with it. I want to have a continuous, Like, here's an easy knife to sharpen. Sorry, just thinking of, I was just reading one of those Dr. Seuss books to my kids, and it was like a rhyming book, and I was the phrase, "Here's an easy thing to say, here's an easy game to play," all right, just popped into my head because I'm a little bit loopy right now. Sorry. Anyways, here's an easier blade to sharpen. Continuous belly, right? It's much easier. This knife being the ideal EDC knife for me, the ideal everyday carry knife, will get carried, it will get used, excuse me. So, it will need resharpening. I can probably resharpen a Tanto, but it's going to be a pain in the butt. I just don't want to mess with it, right? Let's talk about some other blade shapes. Another blade shape that's probably not going to work super well, even though I love it for EDC. Got to be honest here. The blade shape, this Wharncliffe blade shape on the QSP Penguin has been phenomenal. It really has. And honestly, I probably get around, most tasks with it. Some things like, the one thing that I do on a semi-regular basis that this blade isn't the best at is breaking down cardboard boxes. Now, I found that some people argue about these types of blade shapes and cutting into cardboard. Maybe I'm crazy, but like knives like the Civivi Praxis here, it's better for me to, or it's easier for me to apply power into the cut and cut through the box than it is with something like this. You guys let me know how you feel about that. Is it better to have belly? I'm not asking like, tell me so that I know. No, I have my own preferences already because I've done this a bajillion times. Do you prefer a Wharncliffe or something like this, very thin belly? As you slice, I kind of come at it at an angle and I try to get right up behind the edge, right? Sometimes I sort of glide and I use different parts of the edge as I cut into it. Some people tell me that these style blades are ideal, right? There seems to be maybe not a perfectly even resistance to that statement out there, but I've definitely heard it more than once. It's interesting, right? I don't think anybody's right or wrong. It just comes down to preference, whichever feels better. For me, this isn't ideal for those types of cuts. Essentially anything else, this has been fantastic. No, I think I'd rather have some belly. It's funny because this, for the majority of what I do, is pretty good. And I don't want to say the majority, but for a lot of things that I do, this is actually a little bit better than a blade shape like this. But for other things, it's not as preferable enough that it makes me want to shy away from it. It's very good, not ideal. A sheep's foot blade. Let's talk about sheep's foot blade. Now, there's a million different types of sheep's foot blades out there, but this isn't necessarily the best example. I think these are also excellent. The only the only thing that bothers me with a sheep's foot blade, and there are different, there's different variants. Like some sheep's foot blades actually do have a tip, which is the part I'm about to complain about. This doesn't have much of a tip, right? Some of the breaching and puncture tests that I find that I do periodically are made a little bit more cumbersome by the fact that the end of this is essentially a toucan's bill. Maybe that's a bad example because the toucans, right, aren't they? Why is the toucan's bill shaped like that? Is it for breaking into coconuts, or am I wrong? Am I geographically incorrect? Anyways. Oh boy, this is a weird episode. God, the double clutch on this thing, guys. The review's coming on it, but man, the double clutch on this thing sucks. Anyways, sheep's foots, I think, are excellent. I think they're one of the better choices for EDC. My top three, choices for EDC, by the way, just so you know. Sheep's foot, Wharncliffe, and a simple drop point blade, I think, generally speaking, will do the trick. There are hybridizations of things that I think are more or less ideal, which we're going to talk about. But yeah, the sheep's foot blade just doesn't have quite as much of a traditional tip as I'd want in my EDC knife. But very, very good. Your drop point blades like this, too much flat in the griptilian and mini griptilian. We don't get quite thin enough behind the edge to, excuse me, justify this blade shape. For EDC, right, like I said, I'm thinking 125 thousandths or so on the spine so that it can get thin behind the edge. This is probably 125 or even less, probably 110 thousandths, right? Because of this big flat, you end up not being super thin behind the edge on the Mini Griptilian, so it's like, here's a knife that is super thin behind the edge, right? The Civivi Ortis. The spine on this guy is very thin, and then it's hollow ground, and it's a freaking laser beam. It's got a nice tip, right? It's almost too pokey. Clip points, not a lot of material. If I were to do with this knife what I did with the Rat, to, you know, that stupid little prying job that I did that I probably shouldn't have done, you might be asking, what is it? What did you do? We were disassembling some old cubicles at this call center that was not a call center anymore. It was going to turn into something else for the for the town, or for the, I can't remember what the heck they were doing. But we had to pull apart these cubicles, and it was big pieces of like foam and like backboard, whatever. But the skeleton was all steel, and it had these hooks. From moving around and, you know, being adjusted, some of those hooks bent over the years because they had sat in you know, the funny thing is I actually worked at that call center. I was in my early 20s. That sucked. Anybody who's ever worked at a call center, it sucks. But it paid the bills. So, anyways, these hooks and things had bent. And, you know, as the cubicles had been moved around, or as I assume the employees had kicked or shoved or slammed things from being frustrated, right? And, excuse me, some of these coughs are going to have to be edited out. But it would not come apart. And so I had to essentially stick the the tip of my knife into this area and pry to get the latch to release from where it was. And I did not think that this would survive. I thought that it would break the tip or snap the blade or something. No, and it did. Had I done it with this, that would have been the end of this guy. Right? That doesn't make the Ortis a bad knife, no. But that tip is way too delicate for something like that. I thought this guy, you see how much more material there is out here, right? Not just in terms of thickness, but this way. It's also thicker, right? So the Rat's blade is more ideal. What we have left out here are really, really good blade shapes for general EDC, right? Now, we're not talking about the knife itself. Keep that in mind. We're talking about the blade shapes, right? So a lot of people are going, you said the ideal length is only 7 to 7.5 inches. Well, the Praxis is longer than that. We're not talking about blade length today. We're talking about blade shape. Or we're not talking about overall length and blade length, right? So, you know, you could imagine, hypothetically, just a shorter Praxis or shorter Rat, right? These are all fantastic blade shapes. The Ritter Hogue RSK MK1G2, amazing. Probably about 125 thousandths on the spine. There is a flat, but it's up high. This guy gets nice and thin behind the edge, right? Do I need that flat, right? That flat probably makes the Ritter Hogue blade ever so slightly more robust than the Rat blade. Do I need it? I don't know. I mean, it could be there, it could not be there, right? Not necessarily. I mean, it's excellent, right? We're kind of looking at the same thing with the Praxis. Really thin, it's got a little bit of a flat, turns into basically just the point where the swedge meets the bevel that drops down to the final cutting edge. I don't know. I like the fully flat ground blades on the Rats, right? No change in geometry from the cutting edge to the spine. Maybe it's in my head. I'd like to think I can sense it when I'm cutting. Blade passing effortlessly through material, not getting hung up on any change of geometry, right? Ooh, how smart do I sound? Oh, Metal Complex, such a seasoned knife veteran. How poetic. Tell myself to shut up. Same thing with like the Para 3. I mean, the reason that I've come to find, or I've come to enjoy fully flat ground blades is largely because of Spyderco. You guys know that the Para 3 this is my most consistent EDC. Used to also EDC a PM2 a long time ago, and I also EDC'd a Manix 2. Love those blades, right? This is Spyderco's, I don't know what they call it. I call it the Pelican blade, and it works pretty well. The problem is that it's more like a clip point, So you come down to this tip, and it's not necessarily ultra, fragile. Fragile. Jeez. I'm so fancy, I have to say fragile like fragile. Fragile. Yeah, this guy's pretty thick up on the spine, right? This area right here is fairly thin. Not insanely thin, but it's fairly thin. As we come out to the tip, we are tapering here, but I've found this area down here actually feels a little bit thicker than out here. In any case, it has some of the thinness, that I'm looking for. It is flat ground. It's kind of tapers down to a pretty somewhat delicate tip out here, right? And it's a little bit thick up on the spine. All of these are pretty good. Everything out here is pretty good, but I'm going to tell you guys right now, because we're about at the 20-minute mark. I think the most ideal blade shape is a blade that we find on a lot of Spyderco knives. It's there's no revelation to be had here, but Spyderco's leaf-shaped blade, specifically the blade that's found on the Sage. Oh my goodness, this is good. Now this is actually even thinner. If I'm not mistaken, this is actually even thinner than what I said my maximum was. Just looking for the calipers, and I grabbed the tape measure. Let's measure this real quick. The thickness on this guy is coming in at, it's only like 117 thousandths, maybe it's probably 115 thousandths. Now, that's thinner, but because of how this blade is shaped, there's more material out at the tip than there is on like the PM2, right? So as far as like which blade's going to be more proficient at breaching or puncturing, they're probably going to be about the same. Maybe a slight advantage to the PM2 and Para 3, but not enough for me to be like, oh gosh, I don't know. Nah, it just kind of solves the problem for me. The blade is still reasonably durable, or durable enough for the stuff that I might throw at it, right? But we have a much more consistent starting point, for it to drop towards the edge. And the final edge on this guy is very thin. So, this kind of rounds everything out for me, right? Nice and thin behind the edge, continuous belly, not overly thick on the spine, thick enough, and thick enough out of the tip to where it's going to do what I need it to do, be a pretty durable blade shape. It's gonna solve every problem for me. It's more similar. I mean, we can still call this a drop point blade. Like I said, Spyderco calls it a leaf blade, and we see it in a lot of different knives. But of everything that I have used and handled, with a lot of this stuff, I've, just handled it, but, I can kind of gather how it's going to cut, how it's going to feel based on stuff that I've used in the past, which at this point, I've used just as many knives as I've handled that I haven't used, right? Hundreds, literally hundreds and hundreds of knives have made it into my pocket and gotten used. The Spyderco leaf-shaped blade, again, very specifically the one that's on the Sage, is absolutely ridiculous. This is insanely good for EDC. Again, the Spyderco Sage itself is extremely recommendable, right? This is a Sage 1, a newer Sage 1 in Maxima. It's a liner lock. They also do, right now, they have a Sage 5, which is a compression lock, right? But that blade shape, I mean, every now and then there are blade shapes. For those of you who made it to this part of the episode, sometimes there are blade shapes where the geometry is so good. What you get out of that blade shape is so far beyond just what the composition of the steel is, right? Some of my hinders are in 20 CV. Now, I think a lot of people, most people will tell you, CPM 20 CV, this is in S35 VN, by the way, but let's just pretend. A lot of hinders are in 20 CV and M390. M390 has better edge retention than S30V. Let's pretend this Sage is S30V. Yes, it does, right? So a lot of people would gather from that M390 is more performance-oriented than S30V, generally speaking. Yes, I would agree with that. Some elements to variables include geometry and heat treat. Let's assume they're heat treated correctly, right? So we have an extreme opposition in terms of blade geometry. The S30V leaf-shaped blade versus the much more robust Harpoon Spanto M390 blade. The geometry on this guy is so good, it's going to shrug off the fact that the big boy's using M390. You're going to have a much easier cutting experience with this guy, and because it's so much thinner down at the edge, even when it does lose that, you know, that crispy laser beam edge, that fresh off the sharpener edge, right? You're going to be able to push this guy through that material, if we're talking about cardboard, more efficiently over the course of 2 hours than this guy, right? That goes without saying for a lot of people. A lot of people who watch my channel know that, but there are always a handful of people who don't understand how geometry plays a role in a blade's performance. This is a perfect example. At least I think I'm providing a really good example. Yeah, for doing simple things, simple EDC stuff, as much as I love carrying my XM18, this guy's going to just be the more convenient object. It just is. As far as blade shape goes, this is another easy one. As far as blade shape goes in this series, the Spyderco leaf-shaped blade, specifically the leaf-shaped blade on the Sage, is the very best. In my opinion, it is the very best blade shape for general EDC. Are there a million other things that could fit in that role for a million other people? Absolutely. But for me, that guy's the winner. Somehow we made it through this episode without too many coughs, only 20 or 30. Guys, this has been a really fun series for me to do. So we finished up with episode 6. I will do a final episode, 7, which will be the conclusion, where we talk about, hypothetically, what would be my dream knife that encompasses all of these things, right? And then I'm also going to tell you guys what knife exists that is as close to, you know, all of this as it could possibly be. What I think is the very best EDC folding knife that exists today. Yeah, for today, I think that's going to be pretty much it. Like I said, a lot of this stuff can be found right down in the description. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe, because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.